Yes, thanks for inviting us along today to speak. Myself, Amity, Victoria and Tor are really excited about having this opportunity to meet you and hopefully to have a bit of discussion later on today. What I'm going to do this morning is briefly outline some of the general conditions that we see across the global garment manufacturing sector. As I'm sure you're all aware, the global garment manufacturing industry is perhaps one of the most globalised industries in the world, and it has been for quite some time. And what this means is that, for instance, 60% of the world's garment manufacturing takes place in Asia, and the majority of workers across the continent are women. Generally speaking, and unfortunately, conditions for these women workers are extremely poor. So this means low wages. In fact, sometimes we call them poverty wages because it's difficult for them to survive and provide for themselves, let alone for their family, on these wages. An example that I'll give is workers I know who work in Tangerang, which is a district near Jakarta, are getting they are being paid the minimum wage, but even the minimum wage there is set below the official cost of living estimates, and those cost of living estimates themselves are very conservative. And also, that minimum wage is intended for a single worker, whereas we know that in reality many of these workers are supporting extended family, children, and often their elderly parents as well. Conditions in the factories are often dangerous, and working hours are long. This doesn't mean always that workers are forced, although that happens as well, to work the long hours. But if you're only getting a wage, too low to actually survive and to be able to support yourself and your family, you don't often have much choice except to accept long hours of overtime. So what this means is that workers suffer fatigue, and it's difficult when you don't have enough money to get by to really be able to have sort of adequate nutrition and to take care of yourself well. One of the major difficulties that workers have is that, it's not the case that there isn't a means for workers to be able to improve their livelihoods. And it's an age-old tool, basically a union. One worker, like a single voice, if you went up, for example, to UTS management on your own as a student and said, look, I actually think our entire examination process is really unfair. I feel as a student I'm exploited. Your chancellor might just say, oh, whatever, you're probably just a bit stressed with all your homework and you haven't been managing your work-life balance. But if you came together and you said, you know what, I actually represent 2,000 students at UTS, and I can show you I represent them, and we all want better conditions for our examinations, that carries some power. As an outsider, we can't know what the real issues are in a workplace. So they've found that, for instance, throughout the world, the best way to combat things like dangerous working conditions, discrimination, sexual harassment, abuse, is to actually make sure that the workers in that union have a voice so they can point to those issues and bring them up. You can start to ask a lot more questions from the companies that you're buying from. One of the most important things is that we ask for transparency, because if a company is hiding where they're getting their things produced, there's no way that we can have any idea what's happening in those factories, and it will be difficult for the workers to be able to share their stories. So transparency is definitely, it sounds a bit like airy-fairy, but it has very real effects when people reveal what's actually happening, where am I producing my goods. I know that Amity has a lot of really interesting information to share, as does Victoria and Tor, so I'll leave it for them to share more.
Hi, so my name's Amity and I'm the Fair Wear Campaign Coordinator for New South Wales. Fair Wear is a national network of community organisations, women's groups, trade unions, other social justice and faith organisations, and we are a network that exists to try and raise the issue of the exploitation of clothing workers in Australia. We're all a lot of people are very familiar with the fact that clothing made overseas is often made under very exploitative conditions, but there's often an assumption that, oh, it was made in Australia, so that'll be fine. And unfortunately, that's not always the case. In fact, the more that that clothing manufacturing has been outsourced overseas, the more pressure there is on Australian manufacturers to compete with those prices. So, you know, the amount of clothes stores that you see now selling dresses for $10 to $20 is massively different to 10 years ago, let alone 20 years ago. And that puts pressure on companies who are still manufacturing in Australia, whether that be because their orders aren't big enough to send to China or they need to have more control over the quality. There's a massive increase in pressure, and of course, rather than dropping the profits, which a lot of companies will try and drop their costs, and unfortunately one of the costs that people really push down is the cost of labour. A lot of manufacturing in Australia gets outsourced to women who work from home. It is predominantly women, and it's predominantly migrant women, and I don't think a coincidence that employers in this industry look for workers who are very vulnerable, very isolated, don't necessarily speak much English, and are working in their homes, and it makes it very hard for them to collectively organise, very hard for them to go, well, what are you getting paid? Well, hang on a minute, we should be getting more than this. I'm going to hand over to Big Twee.
Hi everyone, my name is Big Twee Pham. I'm as a community worker for Asian women as well. So I'm would like to briefly introduce about Asian women as well as a non-government community organization. So I work as in Asian women organization. We have big network of working women from like the migrant working women in different industry, and I work as a Vietnamese community worker. I work very close with our workers, and later on we have some program for our worker, like radio program for our worker, like our worker to speak out for their condition at work, their right, and how they get the job as our worker to work at home. And we had a support group for our worker, and later on we have our worker advocate group, like the one who work at home, they stay together and they speak out to the government, lobby with the government, with the textile footwear union to stand up for their rights. So, and with me I have our worker. She work at home for many years, and maybe she's the one to speak out about the way she works here like this.
So I wanted to ask you, what would you like to see change for our workers in Australia?
Thì giống như cái người may tại nhà đó, thì bao giờ họ cũng rất là mong mỏi, nhưng mà cái điều này thì tới bữa nay thì tôi thấy cũng có nhiều cái công đoàn, những cái may mặc người ta đấu tranh cho mình.
As our worker, the one who work at home, and I know all the our worker like me still expect like the government change about the condition for our worker as like the worker in the factory, the same like the worker in the factory. We need to have the sick leave, or we need the money when we retire, something like this, and we need to recognize our skill, because we work at home, but we work for high level, so we need to like recognize our skill, like high skill.
I just wanted to add to what Tom said about wanting the pay to match the skill level, and to be paid similarly to workers in factories, and to get things like sick pay and holiday pay and superannuation. Legally, an out worker is actually entitled to the same pay and entitlements and conditions as a factory worker, but I've never seen an hour worker get paid even half of what the award wage is. Our workers are always paid far below the award wage, and that's something that we really want to change. Legally, we've got that status there, and our worker is an employee and has the same rights as a factory worker, but the isolation and the lack of support and lack of language really creates a huge barrier to our workers achieving that, and there are unfortunately a lot of makers and contractors and subcontractors in the clothing industry who are very willing to exploit that. So that's something that we want to see change, and the more that designers try and change it from their end, and the more that we try and change it from the grassroots end, maybe we can change something. Thanks.